And welcome back to Fresh Wounds, your monthly Patreon exclusive episode. And I'm Terry.
And I am Mary Beth. And we are very excited because for Fresh Wounds, we are starting a little series where we are looking at some of the films of one of my personal favorite movements of contemporary horror cinema, the new French Extremity movement.
Yeah. And I'm not as familiar with it. Like, when I was counting down the movies that I have seen, I've seen a number of them, but
Yeah.
I still don't understand the subgenre as a whole. So I'm glad that we're kind of going through this, because I think I've seen like some of the big ones, and then there's a lot that I haven't seen.
Yeah, so actually, to start us off, I want to read a little passage from one of my favorite books ever. This is The Films of the New French Extremity, Visceral Horror and National Identity by Alexandra West, who is an incredible journalist, co-host of the Faculty of Horror podcast with Roomwork's editor-in-chief, Andrea Subasati. This book is like my Bible. And it goes through a lot of the big films of the New French Extremity and the themes, but I think what I really wanted to read was this passage from the introduction that kind of puts into context everything that's going on with the New French Extremity and who defined it and kind of the definition that he made up and how this article that this film critic wrote in a magazine in the early 2000s kind of really defined this movement. So I think I'm going to read this really quick. It's like a paragraph, so buckle up, readers. Buckle up, listeners. I'm going to read you a little bit, and then we'll jump into talking. But, so at the turn of the millennium, France is at a crossroads. The turmoil brewing within the country was becoming untenable. Police brutality, xenophobia, and riots were an everyday occurrence, but few voices ever spoke out about the injustices outside of news reports. And even fewer of those voices were heard outside of France's borders. At the same time, a movement was beginning in French cinema, one that would be named and derided by film programmer and writer James Quant. New French Extremity was, as he declared, a cinema suddenly determined to break every taboo, to wade in rivers of viscera and spumes of sperm, to fill each frame with flesh, nubile or gnarled, and subjected to all manners of penetration, mutilation, and defilement. Referring to the then recent films by French auteurs such as Catherine Breillat, Claire Denis, Gaspard Noé, and Bruno Dumont, among others, Quant rages against his perceived disparity between the high art meant to be achieved by such filmmakers of promise and the viscera-ridden films that were being produced from this emerging subgenre. Unbeknown to Quant, his piece, which appeared in Artforum magazine, would create an umbrella under which a group of desperate and impassioned filmmakers would fall under creating vital, violent, and visceral films which would succeed in finding new ways to shock even the most hardened audiences out of their complacency. The films of New French Extremity were startling, unforgettable, troubling, and deeply French. They are not violent films, but rather films about violence and its larger impact on the world. They are films about France, not the twee, kitschy films emblematic of the vision which France tried to create of itself to maintain its stature to the rest of the world, but rather an honest view of the problems and unrest that have existed in France since its inception. New French Extremity is extreme because it swings the pendulum in violent opposition to the France that represents its ideals but not reality. The films of New French Extremity deal in the terrifying reality of the current and forgotten historical past of France, challenging the country and audiences around the world to awaken from a deep, shared slumber.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's going to be important to kind of keep that in mind as we're going through these films. Because as I'm listening to you say that, I'm curious how this film fits in with that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think by the end of this episode, I think I'll want to have like a little discussion about that, because maybe this discussion will further make me understand that connection, because I'm not sure I feel that in this particular movie.
Interesting, because also this movie that we're talking about first, High Tension, Alexandre Aja's 2003 slasher, was actually, I think, the first movie to really popularize the New French Extremity movement. It had its premiere at the 2003 Toronto International Film Festival. And then from there, I think a lot more people were into the idea of like French extreme horror. And while I think that High Tension, and we'll talk about this, is not as political necessarily as some of the other films within the movement, but I still think it kind of speaks to, well, I don't know, I'm getting ahead of ourselves here. But anyway, the point of reading that passage was basically to be like, there's a lot of interesting context around the New French Extremity movement. It's not just like Gaspar Noé's Irreversible and all of these they're all fucked up movies, but they're fucked up movies, I think, that have a lot more history and stuff going on around them, especially in terms of not only what's going on in France, but also these movies started coming out about post 9/11 as well. And New French Extremity is also, I think, partially, not entirely, but partially a reaction to post 9/11 torture porn cinema that came out in the US at that time. Because torture porn came out as kind of like a nihilistic, like there's nothing, we're, as a country, we have been like attacked and we feel very vulnerable. So how do we kind of look at that vulnerability and make it even more terrifying and horror? And I think France was also reacting to that kind of fear of vulnerability as well, especially with this. So it's like torture porn and New French Extremity, I think, kind of evolved side by side. But the thing with New French Extremity to me is that I do think, in most instances, not all, there is a little bit more going on than just like Saw and Hostel. And I think it also is because a lot of these New French Extremity movies are pretty indie. They were like, torture porn was like Saw and Hostel were getting like released in big theaters and like they were getting a lot of attention, but compared to like the New French Extremity stuff, it wasn't as international. And so it was much more of a national kind of movement and a very French reaction to everything and a very kind of like European reaction to what was going on in the world. Yeah.
A lot of the torture porn that I think was big around here seemed to be kind of brings in, you mentioned xenophobia, and I think a lot of torture porn from that era also dealt with xenophobia, but in like using that as a fear in terms of like critiquing it, because like Hostel is all about people from America going overseas and then being kidnapped. There's a couple other movies about like being in exotic locations. I can't, and the names are escaping me, but there's a lot of movies about sort of like people are outside of the country are trying to kill us.
Well, yeah.
But it didn't seem to like critique that. Whereas from what I'm understanding, New French Extremity kind of does deal with some of these topics, but like in a more critical way. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. So like films like Inside. So Inside takes place while there's a lot of like riots going on, and the riots are going on were specifically around immigration and the way that police were treating I believe Algerian immigrants. I have to triple check, but immigrants from another country who were coming to France. And there was this like a lot of the Inside is a reaction to like people being afraid of darker people. Like the woman in that film is supposed to be kind of coded as an invader and kind of going like side by side with these protests and kind of like a discussion on that. Them is also a look at xenophobia as well. So there is a lot more kind of more critical processing of xenophobia, I think, because it's not just like a lot of the situations in these movies aren't like extreme, like, oh, we're hunting people, but like Them is a home invasion movie that is very like feels very realistic. And Inside, while it's obviously very gory, like it's a woman. It's not like a supernatural or like a society. So a lot of the time these movies aren't supernatural at all. They're people who are just really fucking bad people. And like, again, like Hostel and Saw, a lot of those movies are like people being bad, but there's like a more like a grander kind of fictional story around those people, rather than in New French Extremity. It's usually just like there's not really an explanation. It's just like it's very random, because Them was an inspiration for The Strangers, which was The Strangers is very much like Because You Were Home, and that's kind of like, I think Because You Were Home, that like line kind of applies to a lot of New French Extremity, of like people kind of just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Is a lot of New French Extremity, and people just like the randomness of things, and like something that that kind of passage and strike is that a lot of New French Extremity also deals with the defilement of the female body, which is always very interesting. And like feminism in France is very different than feminism here. I learned a lot about this when I was in grad school, when I was like reading and writing about specifically Catherine Breillat, who does a lot of New French Extremity films like Fat Girl and romance. And a lot of her films are more focused on sex, like taboo sex rather than all out gore. And also writing about Bas-moi, which is another New French Extremity film that also deals with like extreme sex. And those are both directed by women. And how a lot of women are like, Me Too in France is very different. And it's very interesting, like sexual, like ideas about sex and feminism are very different than here. And a lot of, especially like older school women are would seem a little bit more conservative in the eyes of like contemporary, maybe American audiences. Which is interesting because a lot of their films are about like finding sexual liberation in really extreme situations. So it's very weird, but very fascinating how they tackle that. And because I think in a lot of these movements, it's a lot of dudes, but there's actually a decent amount of women directors in the New French Extremity.
You just listed a whole lot more women directors of this than we had women directors of torture porn and such here in the States.
Yeah.
Like, right then and there is an interesting little factoid, honestly.
Yeah, and it is really interesting how there's more women in the New French Extremity movement, like kind of playing with those. Because even like Claire Denis, who did Trouble Every Day, then there is, the woman who did In My Skin, which is an auto-cannibalism movie. Her name is Marina Devan. And, I mean, like, there's so many women working within this genre already that are making really weird stuff. And, I mean, even now, like, I think New French Extremity is still going on today. It's, like, Revenge, Coralie Farget, and then we also have... Juliette de Cornell, who's doing Raw and Titan. Raw is more New French Extremity than Titan, but whatever. But yeah, so there are a lot more women operating in that space and making more like transgressive films and given more of a space to make the transgressive films of the movement, which is, I think, really interesting.
So, one of the reasons why this movement kind of came up between us and this podcast is when we covered New Order last month by Michel Franco, and we kind of talked about how that film felt kind of New French Extremity, even though is centered in Mexico City. So I think it's interesting that this kind of filmmaking style is kind of continuing to today, because we're talking 20-ish years later than like when this kind of subgenre sort of started. Not even a subgenre, this kind of, what would you call it? Is it a subgenre?
It's weird. It's like found footage, where like found footage is a subgenre, but also mostly a technique, because there's so many subgenres that can exist within it. I think it is like a movement is a better way. Like kind of like, French New Wave, like that's like considered a movement rather than like necessarily a genre. I think New French Extremity is like a bigger umbrella term for films that are operating in the horror genre, but like more of the techniques applied.
And so New Order kind of fit into that bill, and it was sort of like I kind of want to explore New French Extremity. But like I think one of the most, I think there's probably two, arguably three, but like in terms of like more mainstream success, I think there's probably two that people have either heard of or have seen, and that would be Martyrs, which we've covered on the podcast, and then I think High Tension is, for me, like as like a novice to this movement, is the one that just jumps out as like, yes, this is New French Extremity. This is, when someone says New French Extremity, my first go-to is High Tension, because I don't know anything else. So I think this is sort of like a good starting ground to talk about this subject, because it's one that I think more people have probably seen.
Yeah, I would also add Irreversible into that kind of like the top ones that everyone knows, because Gaspar Noé is a pretty big filmmaker in that movement too. But High Tension is kind of like the big touch point, because it is I think it is one of the more conventional ones too. Like it's a slasher. It follows those and I think that's one of the reasons why.
We'll talk about those conventions.
But I think that's one of the reasons why it has so many similarities to things that American audiences are used to. So I think like those connections are easier than like Martyrs is just like, what the fuck? And then Irreversible is unlike anything anyone's really had seen at that point. So it's like, I think High Tension was a more accessible, in scare quotes, way to kind of bring American audiences into New French Extremity.
Well, it was also, and maybe I just was not aware, but I'm pretty sure this was also one of the only ones that was released like a wide release in a movie theater. Because it was picked up by Lionsgate.
Yeah.
And I saw it here in Nebraska, whereas most of these films that we'll probably end up talking about never played at a theater here in Nebraska.
Interesting.
Unless it was like a movie later on, you know, like a repertory screening of something. But like on a release, this movie was released wide across the United States. Saw it here in Nebraska. So like, I think this movie for a lot of mainstream film fans is probably the one that any of them that they had a chance of seeing.
Yeah, agreed. And I also just want to quickly add before we jump into talking about High Tension that France does not have as much of a horror scene, or didn't at the time. And I think that's something that I often forget about, is that America has had such a language for horror films for so long, but a lot of countries didn't have that. Like, obviously, there are a lot of, like, fantastical movies and some horror, you know, Eyes Without a Face, Les Diaboliques, like, that, those are French, and Eyes Without a Face is very, and that's something that Alexander West talks about, is how, like, those are very proto-New French Extremity, like, examples of, like, pretty extreme violence for the 1960s. But again, like, France doesn't have the same kind of cinematic language that we do with horror. So this was kind of them, like, filmmakers playing with horror, but in their own context as well, with France's really fucked up bloody history. I mean, like, I'm not a big history person, but like the French Revolution, like the guillotine, like the invention of the guillotine, like France has always had a pretty tumultuous past. So if you even know like the basics of like some of French history, like it makes sense that a lot of these anxieties, violence, attitudes are coming out finally in this very violent kind of medium. I love it so much. As everyone knows, I've studied this. I've read a lot. I wrote about New French Extremity in my master's thesis. Like, this shit is my shit. So, thank you for listening to me nerding out about everything. So, I'm like, there's so many cool parts of it, of New French Extremity. And I'm excited we're talking about it. And High Tension's a really good kind of entryway into it. Again, because it's like...
Yeah.
It has that cinematic language that we're more used to, and you can see more what they're playing with, but also putting the very, like, different spin on things. To put it lightly.
Yes. To put it lightly. Okay, so a little funny tidbit. I know how you first saw this movie.
You do.
Because it's kind of how we got introduced to each other in a way. Because you wrote an article for Gaily Helpful.
Oh my God, I did.
About High Tension. And that was the first time that we, like, I mean, I think we had followed each other.
Yeah.
But, like, that was, like, the first time that we, like, had interacted at all was because of this movie.
Oh, that's right.
And Gaily Helpful.
I forgot about that. Holy shit.
The only reason I remembered about it is I remembered people wrote about it for my site. And so I was like, let me Google High Tension. I was like, oh yeah, 2019. Mary Beth talking about seeing this in the cool darkness of a college screening room.
Yeah, wow, you direct quoted me there. Oh my God, my picture is so cute on your site with Misu on my shoulder. Yeah, Misu. Wow. But yeah, so I saw this movie my sophomore year of college. I was taking a horror film class with one of the best professors I've ever had. His name is Mark Rhoda. And we were doing our unit on Final Girls. And we were reading Men, Women, and Chainsaws. And instead of showing us any other typical Final Girl movie, he showed us High Tension.
What a choice.
And it was a really, like, life-changing screening. Because this was the movie and this was the moment that I was like, I love New French Extremity, like international horror. Because, like, I'd always been a horror fan, but a lot of it had been, like, I had seen a lot of international horror, but a lot of it was, like, me discovering things on my own, / like, my dad showing me a lot of older movies. So there was, like, a lot I had seen, but I had a lot of blind spots. And so this was the movie. And I wrote one of my favorite papers of college about this movie because basically the assignment was we watch this, and then the professor was like, all right, now write me a paper about who's the final girl in High Tension and why. And all of us had to write about who we thought the final girl was. And I wrote an incredible paper about who the final girl was. And this kind of like was a very like important pillar in my, as we all know who I am today as a journalist, as an academic, as a writer, where my interests fall. And so this was like a huge pillar for me just in my education about horror. So it's really important. It's a really important movie to my heart. I as incredibly problematic as it is, this is a very important movie for me. I saw it in college, and then I've seen it countless times since because I just fucking love this movie. And we'll talk about all the plot holes. It makes no sense. I don't give a shit. I love this movie.
Oh.
We'll talk about it.
It's funny that you bring that up because, well, we'll get to that in a moment. But was this your first introduction to New French Extremity?
It was. I had no idea what New French Extremity was at all. And this was, I didn't know anything. A lot of my education about horror was like on my own, and I didn't really know much. And so my professor loved, like he was very, very much loved French stuff. He also showed us Inside as our final movie of the class. And that fucking fucked my brain up. But yeah, this was my formal introduction in college. And I was very lucky to have that. Yeah, that class changed a lot of stuff for me. And so, yeah, I was really lucky to have in my tiny liberal arts school a horror film professor who loved horror enough to offer a class at once every 2 years about it. So
yeah, so for me, the early 2000s was a very big changing point for me as a horror lover.
Okay.
Because up until that point, most of the movies that I had seen were either, I assumed all movies were being made by Hollywood. Like all of movies in history were just being made here in the States and by Hollywood. And if there was nothing else, there was nothing else.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of what I was introduced to. And it wasn't until the 2000s where, and I think I believe I talked about this in our episode on The Ring, but it was The Ring remake that made me like realize, get away, come back. Okay. It wasn't until The Ring remake, the American remake of the Japanese Ringu, that I realized that there were movies outside of the States. As dumb as that may sound, that was a big shock for me. And it like opened up my world to a bunch of other cinema that I probably would never have seen before. And around that same time, like 2 years later, we have Alexander Aja's Alexander Aja's 2003 High Tension is like getting buzz. And this was like Rec, and like The Descent, a movie that I came across somehow and watched before it got released, and on a really bad DVD copy. I don't know where it was pulled from, but like watched this movie and was absolutely blown away at how terrifying it was, how gory it was, and how transgressive I thought it was at the time. To the point that when the movie finally came out in movie theaters here in Nebraska, I corralled all my friends to go see this film in the theater. And let me tell you how angry
You're just like
I was.
Me with my friends, like,
I know.
Let's go to see a movie. Don't ask me what it's about.
Well, and I do remember seeing trailers for this, and it focused on kind of the greenhouse scene by the very end, and her like making her badass little
the barbed wire baseball bat.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of the imagery I saw was of that. And so I was really excited for this movie, and then I had seen an illicit copy of it, and let me tell you how angry I was when we got to the movie theater and it was fucking dubbed.
Ugh.
It was fucking dubbed.
Look, I will watch a dub anime, but dubbed live action, absolutely the fuck not. Dubbed in a theater? Oof.
Yeah, and so I was sitting there the entire time just like cringing because I couldn't stop focusing on how their mouths were not matching up. And this movie does a weird thing with dubs, and this continues to today, where the only copies of this movie streaming I discovered last night are fucking dubbed. And so as I started watching this movie, it does a weird thing with dubbing where it isn't English, but then there will be certain lines that are said in French. And I'm like, why are you doing this? There will be times where when particularly we'll get to this moment, but when Marie is in the cornfield and she is like cursing out Alex, who is like run off into the cornfield, that is in French in the dubbed version. There's like an exchange in the car before they even get there, where they're like saying curse words and stuff to each other. That is in French, and it's not dubbed. It is such a weird choice. I do not understand the choices they made when Lionsgate ported this movie over from.
I guarantee you it was like Americans aren't gonna want to watch that, but then dubbing is never good.
No,
dubbing is always kind of like
you don't
get the emotion at all. You don't get any of that emotional,
like it changes the feel of the characters, because in the dubbed version of this, Alex comes across as sort of like almost not a valley girl, but like kind of like a bitchy, like has like a tone to her that is sort of like a valley girl, California girl type sound to her. Like there are choices that are made by the acting in this in the dubbed version that I was like, I don't think that really tells the character.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was a big movie for me. At the time, I was writing reviews on Amazon.
Hell yeah, you were.
And I had written a review about this movie, and then I wanted to write about it, and my 2003 brain did not know there were things as blogs or anything like that. So they don't have these anymore, but on Amazon you could make a list, and then you could write as much as you wanted. And so I made a list, and I made a list of 3 pictures of, because you have to include items. So I made a pic, and all three items I had to include on the list were high tension. And then I wrote my manifesto defending the twist at the end as not being a big plot hole, and I went through every single scene of this, defending why this movie actually does make sense back in 2024-ish.
In 2024?
Yes, in the future, in 2024, in 2004.
I was like, next year? Wow,
next
there's a lot
year,
to look forward to next year.
List will be back on Amazon.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'm very curious to talk to you about this with the plot holes, because there's one in particular that I think about quite a bit which we'll talk about. But that I also forgot to add that this is the movie that also got me to like gore, because I didn't think I liked gore.
Okay.
I avoided gore for a while. Like I didn't really like Saw and those movies. Like gore was a lot for me, and then I saw this and I was like, wait, I love gore. / that whole class got me to actually realize I liked gore quite a bit. So I will also give High Tension credit for getting me back into gory films. Haven't looked back since. Should we start talking about just everything about this movie? Okay.
My first note, it's fucking dubbed. That was my first note as I started watching this movie.
I saved you.
You did save me. Thank you for that. Because you don't understand all of the sites that I went to. Like, I went to Tubi. It was playing on Tubi. It was playing on Pluto. It was playing on Prime. You could rent it. Like, there was so many different things. Every single one, I went through about a 20-minute period of trying to find an actual subversion. And then Mary Beth came through and saved me.
Unsavory means, but you gotta do what you gotta do. Cinema.
You do. So I kind of going with the whole idea of the plot holes in this opening scene is like the foundation for why I don't think that there is a plot hole in this movie.
Oh, interesting. Okay, because this is my biggest point of the guy jerking off with a decapitated head in his truck.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll get to that too. But this opening scene.
That opening scene. Sorry, I always think about the guy fucking the head. Sorry.
Oh yeah. No. We'll talk about that.
Sorry.
No, this opening scene with where it's like the credits and you hear Marie saying, "I won't let anyone come between us anymore. I won't let anyone come between us anymore." And we see her. We see she's bruised. She has slash marks all over her. She has metal staples in her back, holding her together. And then she stops and says, "Are you recording?"
Oh yeah, are they recording? Yeah.
Are they recording? And so from this moment on, everything that we are seeing is unreliable narrator of this woman telling her side of the story. And so we are seeing up until like the end where it becomes obvious that that's not what's happening. We are seeing how she is telling the story of this guy that came in, that kidnapped everyone, and she was trying to save her friend. We are seeing why she thinks that she is herself kind of the final girl in this, to go back to the question that your professor had asked.
Yeah.
Because everything that we're following since then is from her perspective.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Because again, like you said, we're seeing everything from her POV for most of the movie. She is, she has short hair. She is kind of masculine, and we always talk about the final girl is always thought of to be a more masculine, different, like kind of othered character. And we have her already established as the other character compared to Alex, who is like very femme. And so she's just so set up, and Aja's playing with these expectations, I think, so much of like what the final girl is. They really do like make her look and feel like what the hero of a horror movie is supposed to look like, at least in like American standards. And that makes a lot of sense. That line is really important, and I think people really ignore that.
They do. I ignored it for the longest time because like it seems like a throwaway line, but then when you start to actually think about what follows, because what we get after this moment is the image of her stumbling through the forest, holding her stomach.
Yeah.
We get the car that's driving interspersed with the credits. The car almost hits her, and she's banging on the window saying, "Help me." But by the end of the movie, and we'll talk about this when we get there a little bit more, but by the end of the movie, we realize that it's not her asking to be helped into the car. It's actually Alex. And so we're seeing her point of view of what is going on from this, vice what really goes on. And I think they sort of cross a little bit by the end, and like the idea of this facade that she's trying to tell becomes complicated because, again, spoilers, because we're going to get there eventually and we're going to talk about it more, but Alex is alive by the end of it. And so it becomes a who is telling the right story when we get to kind of towards the end.
Yeah. As
fiction and reality meld.
Because then we have her like waking up from a dream. Then like, are they recording? We have this whole, preview to what we think is going to happen to our protagonist. And then she wakes up from a dream of being chased in the woods barefoot. And she is woken up in the back of the car with her friend, Alex. And this is when we first see Alex, who is very obviously, like, aesthetically, they are incredibly different looking. I mean, Alex has long brown hair. She's wearing pink. She is femme. And then we have Marie, who is very much coded as a butch lesbian, basically. Like,
and it's interesting because it's so funny to watch a movie where you don't, because like I did not see the twist coming when I first saw this movie. Did you?
No.
And so it's interesting to go back and watch a movie because like seeing this opening sequence, it is so very obvious that she is going to be the killer, because even in the dream she says it was weird. It was me running after me. And so it's this idea of like she is both the hero and the killer in her mind in this dream. So when we have like the opening where she is saying, "I won't let anyone come between us," we already have this idea of jealous love. Then we also have this dream in which she is chasing herself. And so it immediately sets up this idea that she is actually the killer, but you don't, at least I didn't realize it on first watch. But afterwards it's like, it's really hard to not see that this is like a big giant hello.
Well, and like we're so used to slashers where like they have these like images, but it's just like their subconscious fighting the bad guy. Like it's always like pretty basic, like the slasher formula. And I think again, Aja is like, the slasher formula. And so like, why would you suspect that this main character we're introducing you is the bad guy? Like, because then after we're seeing them driving into the country, we see the country house, and we're getting that kind of like city versus country vibe that we see in like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Hillbilly Horror of like, oh God, there's nothing to do in the countryside. And it's all of these like weird backwoods people. Because again, we see this like cute little house, but then we cut to the creepy truck.
Before we do get to that, what I do think is interesting is I wanted to kind of piggyback off what you're saying. I will say that this movie is absolutely problematic, but it's obvious that Alexandra Aja understands kind of the tropes that we are used to seeing in American horror.
Yeah.
Because I will say that I think he even gives homages to specific movies that I think we're gonna talk about a little bit later. But like right here, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre opening, the idea of hillbillies and rural, where Alex even says that, you know, we moved into this house, we're renovating it, we were kind of looked at as hippies
yep.
in this little area that is surrounded by rural folk, which horror movies tell us are going to kill you. And so it plays with that idea right here, but in the idea of the French countryside. And then, yes, we get the dirty old truck.
So, and this is the part that I think is the biggest plot hole for me, is this, it's the creepy killer guy that we think is the killer looks like he's getting a blowjob, and we find out that he is jerking off with a decapitated head of a woman that he, after he finishes, he drops it out of the window and like this gross little cackle. And this part to me is hard to kind of think about where it goes in the story, because again, he is a creation of her mind. So where did this part come from? You know what I mean? Like that's my biggest question. Is always that one scene. It's just like, where did that come from?
And see, I think maybe because Aja is trying to play with expectations, this feels a little bit more grounded than it actually is. Because I'm viewing this as a metaphor, because the woman's head looks vaguely like Alex. Mm-hmm. We have this sort of sexual frustration that is going on here that is indicative of what Marie is feeling throughout this entire opening segment. And so I see this as more of like a metaphor for what is going on in Marie's head, of like the hero versus the villain idea of like that sexual attraction and frustration exemplified in a very horrific way. But that is how I viewed that. Watching it, and if you just were to take it as like a narrative thing, you're right. It doesn't make any sense that we cut to this man just chilling in his truck when he doesn't exist. But in terms of like as a metaphor and a visual language of cinema, I saw it as being the kind of thought process that's going in Alex's, Marie's mind.
Because I think it is. I was thinking about this before we were before it came on, about how like it was almost like we're seeing into her brain, like a subconscious part of her mind. Because in the article I wrote for you, and we can talk about this a little bit too, is like the moment where I think Marie has her break is a very specific moment where she has her break, I think, and then it's interesting because like if that is subconsciously in the back of her head, he is also driving to this place and they're driving, so it's like they are obviously traveling on similar trajectories, which I think does in fact kind of line up with this whole, with again that idea of like this is a part of her brain that she doesn't necessarily aware of quite yet, but is lurking back there and is capable of these things.
Exactly.
She is capable of this male kind of violence and this kind of feeling like she is owed something from her friend. Because this whole movie ends up being about she feels she is owed desire from her friend when her friend is not queer, or at least not attracted to her specifically.
Exactly. And I do think, because once we start talking about the moment of the break and the kind of visual language that Aja uses, I do think that this is sort of like an early indication that there is something, whether I mean it's not a very obvious one, but I think it's an indication that there's something lingering in the back of Alex's mind. I always think in my mind, I'm always like Alex is
I wrote about that in my paper, because Alex has like the androgynous name, and that's always it's always the androgynous named women who are the final girls. So you're like, oh, Alex is the actual, and is like the short hair character.
Keep saying Alex.
It works.
Even in my notes,
I
keep saying that because I keep thinking that she is that androgynous kind of masculine and feminine sounding character name, as well as her physical persona on screen, vice the more friend that is actually named Alex. So I apologize because they keep probably doing that in this entire recording. But yeah, so I do think that there is like, I think whether wrongly or not, I think Aja is playing with split personalities and something that is a cinema language that has gone on through time, because we will start to see visual language in the house that I think supports that idea of what he's trying to do. Whether, I mean, again, problematic all over the place. Mental illness is always been used as a crutch in horror films. It is what it is, but I think that's what he's doing here.
I agree. I 100% agree. I think, again, problematic, but fascinating in how it is playing with these tropes we see. And I think I think what I also appreciate with this is like the camera stuff that he does. Like when they're first, when Alex is introducing Marie, like her father and everything, the camera sticks on on Marie as they're talking behind her. And there's, again, this like centering on her that makes sense as our protagonist, but also because she is the center of the story that she is telling. And now, like, I'm like playing with that, and now I really like that, like thinking with that line about like she's so in focus on camera, not just because she's like supposed to be our main focus, but because she is like telling, like the story that she is relaying is so focused on her and her innocence and her making her seem like the good person and the hero, and as being like and it's also interesting again because in this house specifically, like she is the outsider, Marie, like it's not her family house. She's getting put like in the upstairs room away from everybody. She's new. She's different. And they're, again, like playing with that outsider vibe of like,
she's also completely cut off from the family in a way, because she even has her own bathroom up there. Like everything that she needs is in that little room. She does not need to go into the rest of the house. Yep. And so even from that perspective, I like that you said that, because I didn't even think about that until just now, but she is being kept separate. She is being told, you are not part of this house.
Well, she's
in a weird way.
If I just thought about this, she's kind of like the mad woman in the attic, if we really want to get
to, like,
oh
my God,
she is the mad woman they put in the attic, and it's like so coded, and I never thought about it until now. The very much bad woman in the attic vibes.
I didn't even think about that either. Because I was also thinking how she's almost sort of like the boyfriend as well, because she's meeting the parents. You know, that is a big moment in people when they start to date. And from her perspective, I think she can almost see that this is her meeting the parents, and it's like a more intimate idea, but then she is being kept away from them up in the attic, where she has everything that she needs is up there, and she doesn't have to be part of the family.
Exactly.
It's weird.
It is very weird. Like I definitely get, like, she sees it as, I'm meeting the parents. Like, she has, and again, her having such a different perspective of what her relationship is versus her relationship, like what Alex thinks. And again, like after she sees the room, we then see Alex and Marie in the kitchen with Alex talking about boy problems. This is important because in talking about boy problems, they then go to bed, which is then what leads to the moment that I believe is kind of like the switch in Marie's head for everything. Because, Marie is here trying to like give her friend boy advice when she obviously is in love with her friend.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about that boy advice because it starts in the car.
Yeah.
It starts in the car when it's dark and they're driving down in the cornfields. And it's obvious that Alex thinks that Marie needs to it almost comes across on this rewatch as Alex is trying to, what's the word? Avoid any kind of conversation about this topic. Like, I think she might know that Marie is into her, because there's this moment where Marie is driving and Alex looks like she's sleeping and she's staring at her and she's like eyes on the road, and then it becomes like this almost a verbal joust between the two where Alex is like, why aren't you with another guy? And it's always the same story about the guy she tells him. And then when they start having this like conversation, all of a sudden Alex is like, oh wait, there's the cornfield. I think I saw someone in there. I'm going to go take off. It's almost as if she's like trying to deflect any kind of conversation. And so then again, when we're in that kitchen area and they're talking about being skeptical of single guys and when are you going to take the plunge? You're going to end up alone. She keeps telling Marie.
Yeah.
And so it's like this constant thing of like, Alex is like, if I can only get her a boyfriend, she will stop being queer. Is almost how I kind of took it this time. It was like, I'm going to push off the attention off of me I'm going to deflect it onto, why aren't you going out to see guys? Why aren't you going to do this?
Yeah. Well, and so it's after kind of that conversation, Marie runs outside to smoke a cigarette and is by herself outside the house. But I'm like, she goes up to her bedroom and
even while she's smoking, she
sees something.
She sees Alex.
Oh, she's watching her change in the window.
Herself.
Yeah.
Taking shower in the window.
So we already have that predatory kind of gaze set up.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you weren't sure about it before, I think Aja is very much like, let's just like be very clear about like what is like the gaze is here and the desire and everything. Because, well, we'll get to that in a second. But it's like, we see her laying in bed and fully clothed, looking around the room like this is a new room. It's kind of creepy, and it's almost like she's trying to calm herself. So we have a masturbation scene. She puts on her handy dandy Walkman and she's masturbating. But as she's masturbating, we have a homie rolling on up to the house. And we have this really pretty fucked up but fascinating conflation of like this queer lesbian sexual desire and murder. Like right off the bat, very much linked. Because as she's coming, he is coming, but not in a sexy way, in a I have arrived in your home. So I think at this moment of her achieving orgasm is when her brain kind of breaks and when she becomes the killer. And I wrote about this for you, actually. And like that to me is the moment where we see her kind of come into her role as the bad guy.
Word choice.
Hey. I do want to point out really quick. So the big baddie who we see, who she says is the bad guy, he's played by Philippe Nahon. He is pretty renowned in French Extremity. He plays a bad guy in Irreversible. He also plays a bad guy in Calvaire. So he is, if you think he's creepy, well, he plays a creepy guy in a lot of New French Extremity films. So you've probably seen him in a couple of Noé's films. He just is really good at being a creep. But he passed away recently, unfortunately, in 2020. But he has a really incredible career. But I just wanted to point that out because he's a big actor in the New French Extremity movement.
Well, while we're talking about this, also from the commentary track that Aja did for this, there were 2 points of interest that came up. One, that this actor was tired of playing villains when they approached him for the film, and he initially passed, and they ultimately convinced him to go dark one more time with this film because he was tired of it. And so that's one thing that I think is interesting and kind of continues on with what you're saying. But the other one is that they bring up the fact that the idea of this hulking, ogre-like appearance of the killer is a loose reflection of a real French serial killer, Émile Louis? I don't know how you would say it in French. Émile Louis, I believe, who was a French bus driver and the prime suspect in the disappearance of 7 young women in Burgundy in the late 70s. And so I think there's some like visual language there of sort of like, it would be like if someone were to, have a character that was as charming as like Bundy, right? Like in American culture, like you would say, or Manson or whatever the case may be. They're using this sort of visual language of this real life serial killer for this film. Yeah.
Interesting. I think what's another thing that's interesting in her masturbating sequence is while she is masturbating, we also get shots of the whole family sleeping in a very voyeuristic way. And right when she finishes, the door knocks and the dog is barking and the parrots are screeching. But remember, she was outside smoking a cigarette. So I think there's something interesting there about, like, there's something going on here with, like, her watching everybody. And again, like, I don't think it's necessarily, we need to point out all the plot holes because, like, you can complain about plot holes until you're blue in the face. But I do think for most of this, you can kind of see where her story versus what actually happened doesn't line up. And I think it's super interesting. I just love, I know it's fucked up to say I love this, but I just love that her orgasming lines up with him ringing the doorbell. I just love it. And the best part is when the guy rings the doorbell, he just stabs the dad immediately. Like, it's my favorite because it doesn't just, it gets right into the shit. You know what I mean? Like, this is a movie that I think really efficiently establishes like who everyone is very quickly, and then the violence just starts. Like 20 minutes in, the guy walks in and just stabs the guy. There isn't like some facade of like, I needed to like pull over the guy, and like, which I think makes sense with it being Marie. It's like it just starts and the massacre just begins. And this first fucking kill is one of my favorite horror movie kills of all time. I will so say good. It's so good because, you know, we get our boy / our girl like stabbing the dad in the face and then shoving his head as he crawls up, shoving his head through like the banister / the rails on the stairs, and then knocks off his head with a fucking dresser. It's such a good, it's so deeply fucked up and disgusting, but it's so good. And the way he just, I love how it just like, the guy comes in like he already knew. And again, because he knows the dresser is there because she knew the dresser was there. It's like when you really think about like kind of a lot of things that happen. Oh, the head, there it goes, just spurting.
Yeah. And you know, the thing is that like, I had never seen anything like this before. I had never seen a head pop moment like this. Yes, I had seen stuff in the 80s that were like, you know, kind of jokey in terms of like the over the top gore.
Yeah.
And this is over the top, but this is also grounded, at least at this point in my mind, that there's a serial killer that's coming in and he just pushes off this guy's head. And to see it happen was such a moment of like, oh my God, I cannot believe that I'm seeing this happen in front of me right now. It was such a shocking moment for me when I first saw it.
Well, and like it's interesting because with torture porn films, like there is still that shock factor, but there's something about the violence in movies like this that feels even more horrific. Because it's still a spectacle, like torture, but I feel like torture porn is so much about spectacle. And here, there's like there's more going on here about desire and that kind of thing. But I feel like in movies like Saw and Hostel, it's kind of pretty surface level, the themes. You know what I mean? Like, in terms of like xenophobia and violence, and like you're coming here to see all this violence. And again, like, you're watching High Tension for the spectacle of the violence as well. But there's something a little bit more terrifying about the intimacy of the violence, especially in High Tension, I think.
I agree. And to kind of continue on with like the visual language of the film that I kind of hinted at earlier, here is where I think that there is an obvious break in her personality. And again, I'm using this in cinema terms. I'm not talking about like
psychotic. Yeah, exactly.
Right. This is like in this film using visual language and cinema language of something that has been used throughout time. We get this idea of this break because as you said, she masturbates and comes and then he gets killed. But then what's interesting is Aja shrouds her in darkness. And there's moments where she's just standing in darkness, unable to move. Like she doesn't know what to do. And you could look at it on your first viewing as being like, she's terrified. What do you do? She's stuck there. But the way he frames her is as if she is seeing what's happening and she is unable to stop it. And so she is standing there holding her arms and she is bathed completely in darkness and she does not know what to do. And I think that this is, again, the cinema visual language explaining that we have two personalities here. We have the person that thinks that she is the final girl, that is the savior, and also this idea of the villain that is stuck inside of her. Yeah. And that moment happens a lot. We see the intercut between her standing in various shades of darkness while the killer is doing things. And it shows that she is stuck in her head, unable to stop the violence that is happening.
Well, and that's why she's so able to also effectively hide from the guy when he comes into the attic. And she's able to do it like, oh, you're so smart. You make the bed. You put your clothes under the bed. Like, he can't find you. Like, it's all good. And so again, like we have this really tense moment that we have in a slasher of the final girl like encountering our killer for the first time and hiding.
Yep.
And you have this, he's the heavy breathing of the killer in this as a guy is like it's just like very wet and
it's so gross.
And like but it's so funny because as you watch this movie, you realize like how perfectly she does everything and how it just seems like this guy is like looking at everything just like the way she kind of made the bed and like somehow she just seemed to know exactly.
Cleans up the sink and he reaches in there to feel it if it's it's leaking.
Yep. Touches the heater to see if it's still warm. Like all of this stuff that is so, again, visual language of. And I think there's something really interesting if you want to think about, like, the visual language of, like, two personalities. Like, again, this is not clinical at all, but, like,
and I want to have those warnings out there that when we talk about it, we're talking about it in terms of the cinema language that is being used, not necessarily...
Yeah.
Because it is a problematic... Again, we have a movie that is using mental illness as a crutch for violence.
Well, and we all know, like, split personality is not the way that a movie, like, split personality, dissociative identity disorder, however, like, the right way to call it, dissociative identity disorder, like, it's not portrayed very well at all ever in cinema.
No.
But we still have this really good moment of tension here before you know the twist. It's like, it's so interesting watching this after knowing the twist, because you're like, damn, this is still a really good, tense moment of him walking around with his razor blade, just, like, looking for someone to kill, which is so interesting that he goes. And another thing that's like super fascinating is how he goes all the way upstairs to her room when there's the mom and the daughter and Alex, and then also the kid, but he goes all the way upstairs to the attic.
And I do love this sort of cat and mouse game, early cat and mouse game between Marie and the killer, where she is struggling to get everything done, try to fold up the foam that she was trying to, find a plug-in for, hiding under her bed, making her bed, doing all this kind of stuff. It is a very intense moment. And I love that. I love the way it plays to that sort of expectation of like, you're like, oh my God, he's going to find her. And he pulls up the bed, but he's only one corner and he doesn't think to pull up the other corner. But it's like, there's that kind of tension that just builds from this movie, because this film is paced incredibly well.
It is.
And the moment that this initial violence happens until the end, it is just one tense moment after another. And I love how on edge this opening made me feel first watching it.
Exactly. Like, again, you get really thrown into it. And I mean, the title High Tension really speaks to what this movie experience is like. It is incredibly high tension. It is incredibly tense and like doesn't stop in terms of how just much of a batshit crazy film this is from beginning to end.
Yeah. And so she ends up hiding in a closet, trying to go find a phone from in the house. She hides in the closet of the parents' room. The mom starts climbing into the room and finds the cordless phone. And there's this moment where we see the horror in Marie's eyes. And this is another moment that I do think Aja is referencing other films, because as I was watching this and I saw the way she was holding, terrified in the closet, it's the same as the poster from He Knows You're Alone. It's this movie poster of this woman like sitting here like this, and it's almost like a recreation of that poster. And I had to like post on Twitter, it's like, what is this movie? Because I couldn't remember what the name of the movie was, and luckily Gina Radcliffe of Kill by Kill came through and was like, it's He Knows You're Alone, which is again an interesting idea of like He Knows You're Alone with this movie in terms of like a killer and this woman that is so terrified. Like, I think it's playing with a very subtle but like an icon of American filmography.
Yeah. Well, and I also feel like, again, thinking of like cinema language and thinking about like how we are watching Marie watch these things happen. It's almost like she's dissociating. Like she herself, like, again, like part of her is watching another part of her commit these acts, and it's like she's witnessing herself and is unable to stop herself, is kind of, I think, how you can see a lot of this, of like, because especially after we see the killer go to her room, he goes right to Alex's room and like caresses her face with a razor and tells her to shush, and it's like you can see the, you know, like the creepy perverse attraction going on here. And it again kind of mirrors, it is basically like Marie's id gone crazy and it's out and it's just acting purely on impulse, and all she can do is kind of watch it happen and not understand that it is herself doing it.
And I think that's why this movie kind of plays with the unreliable narrator and then also reality, because we're seeing things from her perspective, but then we're also seeing people react to her in horror and in confusion, because there's the moment after she comes out of the closet and the mom her throat is slit, she's laying on the ground, and she just keeps saying, why? Mm-hmm. And it's because she's like, why are you doing this to us? Like, what did we do? But because we are so inside Marie's mind, we don't register that she is asking why she is doing this.
It's like we're so stuck in the interiority of Marie's head that, again, we don't really understand. Because, again, like, she is acting, like, desperate, and she is so much, like, is following all those trends we think of the final girl, and, like, her attempts to save everybody, hiding in the closets, witnessing horrible acts of violence. Like, you know, we see the little brother get shot in the fucking cornfield. Like, it's so, again, like, I get taboo breaking cinema. I mean, they killed a kid in a cowboy outfit. Like, that's so, it's so deeply fucked up, but, like, speaks to the nihilism of these films, too. Like, what my professors called, instead of New French Extremity, like, French nihilism, is just kind of this, like, inability to kind of escape fate and, like, escape violence, and no one, it doesn't matter how old you are, like, you still will experience, it doesn't, like, care about age. Just the way of the universe is dark and kind of fucked. So what can you do? And this film really gets to that.
It does. It absolutely does. And so this is another thing that we're going to see a couple times throughout the rest of this movie is when Marie goes up to Alex, and Alex has now been chained up with heavy chain. She has this, I don't know
like
what it is.
It's like a rubber, like, exhaust thing, or some kind of weird rubber pipe that's, like, gagged in her mouth.
But so she isn't able to talk. She isn't able to be like, why are you doing this? Which I think is an interesting way to fix, like, a plot hole in this, because, again, we have our perspective of what's happening is, as you said, so firmly within Marie's point of view. But if you look at the reactions to people to her, it is the truth. And so whenever we see Alex and the two of them together at this moment and beyond, Marie is, like, wild with fear. And you could take this on a first viewing of being like, obviously her parents are killed, her little brother's killed, she is chained up, I think she was just raped, she's been murdered, like, everyone's been murdered, there's a lot of violence going on. So you could see this as sort of like a woman just, like, mad with fear. But she keeps looking at Alex not as a savior, but as, like, an absolute terror, and she shrinks away from her, falls over later on in the movie. And so we're seeing, again, the reality of what is happening, but we're seeing it through the corrupted lens of Marie. And I think it's so fascinating to watch. And what people say is a plot hole, I say is just, again, the idea of reality and an unreliable narrator trying to somehow coexist at the same time.
I agree. I think that is really helpful in watching this and keeping that in mind in terms of, like, again, what she says is happening versus what actually happened. And because, again, we are seeing this from her perspective, we're not going to get the actual story. Like, we see a little bit of it at the end from Alex's perspective, but we're not going to get the full truth. And I think this is a movie that is kind of pushing at your expectations for truth and, like, getting all of the answers the right way. I think a lot of American horror cinema wants to kind of tidy itself up and kind of give you all of the answers and kind of, you know, you understand exactly what happened kind of thing, especially, like, mainstream, like, a mainstream horror cinema, I think, does that. And again, like, especially post 9/11, you either want, like, a happy ending that kind of wraps everything up, or a pretty, like, dark ending. But, you know, you get your answers for the most part all the same. But here, you don't get all of the answers necessarily. It kind of leaves you thinking, which I think does kind of match this idea of, like, we're not, like, you know, even if you are a country in power, you're still not going to always know the right thing to do. You're not always going to have the answers. And there is something about, like, kind of leaning into this idea of mystery and the inability to ever fully know the truth that I think is really important. That I think Aj might be playing with here too. Of like, you're not always like, I'm going to challenge what you want. And that could also just be a very generous reading of plot holes, but that's how I choose to read it. So,
can you also imagine how terrifying it would be to be Alex in this situation where you just saw Marie murder people, like you've heard her kill people, and then she comes to you and says, the phone's been cut, we got to work this together, I need you, I can't do any of this alone.
And you're like, okay, cool, my friend has absolutely lost her fucking marbles. Like,
can you imagine like how terrifying that would be to be like, what is happening? You just murdered my family and now you're acting as if like you're trying to help us. Like that dichotomy there is just would be too much for my brain to handle.
My brain would then be like, all right, cool, we're just dissociating into oblivion, goodbye. Like,
which is honestly kind of what she does through part of this movie.
Yeah.
It's just like she's like, I there's nothing I can do.
Well, because at this point then we're kind of going on the run. Like, this family is killed pretty efficiently. Like, dad dead, mom dead, brother shot to death in a cornfield. Like, it takes like 15 minutes for everything to get wrapped up. And then we are, like, on the run. We are in his truck. We are chugging along to wherever location whatever location he is taking Alex. And we have, well, then there's also this really interesting part where he's looking at the photos on the fireplace and is, like, cutting out faces. He cuts out Alex's face of a photograph. Mm-hmm. And it's just, like, again, watching it back now, it's, like, so interesting because it's, like, obviously it's her being a fucking creep, but it feels so much like, just, like, was this guy, because it asks a lot of questions, like, does this guy know her? Like, was he following her? Is he just, like, a weirdo who knows exactly what he's, like, it feels, it's, like, this weird, like, dichotomy between is it random or is it planned? And obviously we find out later, like, this was maybe not planned, but there's more of an awareness of what is going on in this house than this guy would have. But regardless, there's just like these creepy little details that you're like, wait, the fuck? And then when you get the reveal, you're like, but yeah, my other question. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
So my big question for plot holes here is, did she get a truck or is she in their car?
That's a good question.
That's the other thing that like I'm always curious about. You know what I mean? Like with the car, and like. Because again, I usually don't care about plot holes, but when I'm talking about this movie in particular, there are a couple moments like the blowjob scene at the beginning, and then the truck. Is the truck real, or is it their car?
I don't think it is.
I don't think it is either.
It's her car.
I think, yeah. Again, like, we don't get an answer, but I think it is the car. And, like, you know, we see her sitting in the back of the truck, but I think it's obviously her thinking she is sitting in the back of the truck where we have her actually driving.
I just imagine her driving with poor Alex in the back seat and her going from like, we can do this, there's two of us this time, to then pouring alcohol over her and threatening her with fire later
Very
on. Like,
Gollum. Sorry, but just
yes, it is. It absolutely is. I just imagine, I was like, how fucked up is this situation from, if you were to see this movie from Alex's perspective, if you were to see it from her perspective, like how deranged this would be.
That's almost scarier to me.
Yeah.
It's just like, your friend is very obviously experiencing a horrendously violent psychotic break, and you're just sitting there like, how do I do this? I don't know what to do. I don't know. And then again, it makes sense when she's back there presumably trying to pick the lock off of the back door of a moving car, and he doesn't hear it. And it's like, and she's screaming, and it's like nothing is helping. It's like, oh, it all makes so much sense why you're screaming and being like, get the fuck away from me. But this is another really interesting moment of having also Marie in shadow. Again, because it's dark out. But again, there's like this really interesting, because he in the front seat is a little bit more in light, but in the back, she is in shadow as she's trying to comfort.
Yep,
as she's trying to comfort Alex and everything. So there is part of her that is obscured. And also, something that I also wonder in watching this again, because in the truck, you know, in this real /fictional truck, we see blood on the ceiling. He has photos he's collected of previous victims. Do we think she may have done this before?
I don't know. That's a good question. I do wonder if... So, again, I do wonder if the way in which this vehicle is being described and visualized is, again, her trying to tell people that it was this random guy that did this.
True. Like, it is a serial killer.
Because...
Like, those little
another
details.
interesting thing... Right, because another interesting thing from the audio commentary that I think would be well known for anyone living in France, but is not for me, is the killer's truck is a Citroën. I don't know how to pronounce that. Citroenh, which is probably the most well-known French vehicle. And so what is she saying? She's saying that this well-known French vehicle, which no one is going to be able to find because it is a standard truck in France, it'd be like saying it was a Ford F-150. Like, it is a standard truck in France. And so again, if we have a person that is trying to position this idea of this serial killer and she is the hero, they would never find this truck because everyone has it.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. See, that's the thing about some of these movies is like the very like French context of like that truck. It's like, oh, okay. Because again, like New French Extremity movies like this are very French. They're not necessarily trying to be like incredibly accessible. So that makes a lot of sense. It's like she picked a generic car to be like, yeah, he had it. And I guess the small details of like, he collected pictures. It's definitely a serial, like that makes sense too. Yeah. But there is a tension of like, has she done anything else weird before?
I know.
You know what I mean? Like, there's again, like these questions you ask, like even when you know this, the twist, like she's obviously closeted. So how has that, like, has that manifested? Because again, like this whole movie is kind of like the effects of being a closeted lesbian and like what happens when you repress your desire. When you repress your desire, you become a crazy, psychopathic, sweaty old man serial killer. Not actually, but he's so wet in this movie. Whenever you see him, he's so gross. And again, like, it's the point of, like, she sees him as, like, the complete opposite of her, as, like, this gross old man. But poor Philip Nahon of always being, like, the gross old sweaty man. Like...
And getting asked to come back to do it one more time.
Sorry, bud. Because, well, then we get to my favorite scene in this movie, or one of my... There's so many good scenes in this fucking movie, the way it's shot. Like, this gas station scene. Like, there's so many set pieces in this, because we have, like, the house set piece where there's all the murders. But then now we have the gas station where she runs in, and she's like, I'm about to save everybody. But that goes poorly. Then we go to the bathroom, the gas station bathroom scene, though. That one is one of my favorite examples of building tension. Like, that, this whole, again, set piece. And they're not...
But even before we get to the bathroom, I love this visual image of her sneaking out of the truck while he is filling up the tank, and it's making a tunk.
Yes.
As if it's like a ticking clock. Like, she knows he has this much in order before that tank is full, and he is not going to be distracted. And as she's trying to move, and we get that image of, instead of like a clock ticking down, it is the gas
it's
moving
so
up. It's such
good.
a good visual language to like know that this is a ticking clock moment that is purely in the real world, as opposed to having like a clock. It is. I find that so fascinating. She's trying to move, and we know pretty soon it's going to be full, and he is not going to be distracted.
Well, like,
anymore.
we see her, like, the slow-mo, like, her running as quickly as she can, and as soon as she hears, excuse me.
Great shot.
It's such a good, of her going, like, and sprinting in. And this is, like, I didn't mention this before, but this definitely has that kind of gritty green that we see also a lot in post 9/11 more nihilistic horror. Like, we love a good early 2000s gritty green filter on everything that makes, like,
we sure do.
Very Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2003, just, like, makes everything feel even grosser and grimier, especially when we leave the house and go into the bathroom. We go into the gas station, the bathroom, the greenhouse scene. Everything feels so much grittier with this, like, weird, like, grimy filter on everything, and I love it. I love early 2000s grimy filters. It's just so good.
Me too, and I'm not sure what they used to film this on, but I love the sort of noise on the film stock that is being used. I don't know if it's film. I don't know if it's digital. I don't honestly know, but I do love the kind of grimy look of the film. It brings back to sort of like this 1970s style American film. It reminds me of sort of like that look of film back in that grindhouse era.
Well, again, like it's got the Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibes to it. You know what I mean? Yep. Like we're not, now that we're in buildings, it's a little bit different, but still we get the gas station. We have the griminess, the grittiness. This like poor dude implicated in we have this poor fucking gas station attendant like implicated in everything, and it's like incredibly tense situation.
And it's sexual language again, where we have the man talking to him, calling him Jimmy, and saying, "Hey, have you ever brought a girl here? I think this would be a good place to have a girl come by later for service, Jimmy." Like it's crude sexualized language that is being utilized in this moment that kind of fits in with the sort of sex and violence feel of this entire film.
But even at one point when he's talking to him on, like when it's the two guys talking, the killer like caresses Jimmy's hand at one point too. Like there's so much interesting like touches and like the way the conversation is going. And again, like we think it's her watching this, but it's actually her
caressing his hand and
like playing with the sunglasses, and like it's really cool. Like the more you watch this, the more things you pick up, and the more appreciation, at least I've had, for the way Aja crafts the story.
At this moment, though, I do want to take a pause and read. I want to do a little plot summary of something else. All right, so China Shepherd is a college student visiting the family of her friend Laura Templeton for a long weekend. This comes to a violent end when serial killer Edgar Vess breaks into the house at night and methodically kills all the occupants except Laura and China. After discovering that Laura has been tied up and raped, China leaves, promising to return. China hears Laura screaming and runs upstairs intending to attack Vess with a knife. Before she can intervene, Vess kills Laura and takes her to a motorhome. Unaware that Laura is dead, China sneaks aboard the motorhome and finds her friend's corpse. All right, she's hiding in the back of this room, planning to escape, when Vess stops at a gas station. China secretly watches Vess boast to the gas station clerk that he is holding a young girl prisoner in his basement before he kills them and drives away. From this moment, this is a plot synopsis for Dean Koontz's Intensity, which
I was waiting
on the podcast.
I was waiting for when this was going to come up. I was waiting for you. I was like, Terry's going to bring up Dean Koontz at some point, because we were even looking for the book when we were in San Francisco.
I sure was, and this is up until this moment. Intensity is the name of the book. High Tension is the name of this movie. They are very similar in aspect in a lot of the overall plot structure of this opening bit. It changes a bit, obviously, in High Tension because, one, Alex is not dead in High Tension, whereas her other character, the character is in Dean Koontz's Intensity. There's another person trapped at this guy's home. It gets a little bit more serial killer-y vibes as opposed to this sort of chase sequence, but this opening bit is almost beat for beat the same as Dean Koontz's Intensity. And so I was trying to find something about this because I knew this. I'm not the only person. I'm not the only person to have noticed this connection. And so I did find that when he was questioned at Sundance Festival in 2004, director Alexander Aja acknowledged that he had read the novel and was aware of the similarities. Meanwhile, on his website that is since the time of this being published has been reworked, and so I could not find it, but I am basing this off of a single quote I could find on Wikipedia that linked to his website before it was changed. On his website, Koontz stated that he was aware of the comparison but would not sue because he found the film so puerile, disgusting, and intellectually bankrupt that he didn't want the association that it would inevitably come if he pursued an action against the filmmaker. And that is a quote from his website that has since then gone under, changes and started working. But that is Dean Koontz's thoughts on this movie.
Dean Koontz, what the fuck? Do you even read what you've written, my brother? Not be ashamed, but don't you be shaming Alexandre.
But I just thought that was so interesting. Because I'm telling you.
So puerile and disgusting. I don't want association with it.
Intellectually bankrupt.
That is high praise. I want someone to call my work intellectually bankrupt. I think that's all I aspire to be. Someone to call me intellectually bankrupt.
How moralistic, Dean Koontz, for someone that has spent a lot of his time writing about rape and murder and
I was going to say,
and...
like, buddy, look in the mirror. I feel like sometimes it's like, oh, you write it, it's not the same as being able, like, to seeing it, I guess, to people is like, oh, how could you put this into images? And I'm like, you wrote it. Like...
But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up because it is something that is like stuck in my head this entire time. Because when I was watching this movie for the very first time, because I had read Dean Koontz's Intensity, I'm sitting in the movie theater going, is this supposed to be a remake of Intensity? Like literally, as I'm watching this movie, I'm like, is this an adaptation? Because it does follow up until it changes right at this moment. Obviously, aside from the fact that the one character is dead,
a ton of similarities.
Oh yeah, it is a plot for plot, major plot point start of that book, and of course then things change at this point. This is like the end of where the similarities I think are, and it just goes off on its own thing. But like as I'm sitting as I'm sitting here watching my copy, is like, what is happening here? I have seen this before.
Then we have the separation again, where he looks for her, and we have the incredible bathroom sequence where he's looking for her in all the stalls and just so happens to not check the stall that she is in. And we have this, the incredibly tense moment of her looking again. Like, is he in any of the stalls? Like, her smile as she's looking through each one is really interesting, too, as she's like, oh my God, he's not here.
And then we get a great horror movie fake out moment where she goes up to the sink and she leans over and she looks back up. And normally, this is the point where the serial killer would be reflected in the mirror. And guess what? The serial killer is reflected in the mirror because it's her.
I love it so much. Oh, it's so good. Oh, God, this movie is incredible. I love it so much. Again, I know how problematic it is, but it's so clever in a lot of its work and really bad in others.
Yeah.
But fuck. Because then we have this whole, like, okay, she's going to be a hero. She called the cops. She's going to go save her friend. And she's going to figure it all out. And this is where it's like, oh, of course. Like, she steals this, like the incredible yellow car of... But again, like, none of this is happening. It's all happening in her, as she's telling it. And I think this is where people get confused again, like, what the fuck, how? But again, I think the way you said it, like, they're recording, it's so much her, like, it's so Fast and Furious-esque bullshit in terms of, like, oh, she found a yellow car with black racing stripes that she's going to drive and capture, like, drive and find her friend. Like, it's so cliche.
Yeah.
And it's like...
It's almost comical.
It is. Yeah, like the way she tears out of the fucking parking lot, like, oh, I'm gonna
all sent to Muse's Newborn song.
It's just like...
It's almost camp.
Like, babe, like, this is such a fucking, like, lesbian fantasy if I've ever seen one. You've got the goddamn dice, like, the fuzzy dice in the mirror, and, like, the wooden beaded seats of the car. Like, it's just... such a fantasy.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, this
is like, I'm gonna go save the day while...
Yeah, but...
that's not what's happening.
Meanwhile, like, she's actually smoking a cigarette and threatening to light her friend on fire that she just coated in Jack Daniels. And it's just, like, so fucking... It's darkly kind of funny, actually. Like, if you think about it, it's kind of darkly hysterical of just, like, she in her head is like, I am a lesbian superhero, and actually she's a fucking monster. And it's just so... The delusion that is happening here is fascinating. And again... I'll keep saying it, incredibly problematic, but still fascinating. The fuzzy dice is my favorite.
It's such a great little...
It's a car chase moment. We have a mini car chase.
Yeah.
Which I find, again, hilarious because it's like, what slasher film has a car chase in it? But really, what slasher films have car chases in them? I feel like most slasher villains don't drive cars. We saw Michael Myers drive a car for a little bit, but like he's not.
I'm trying to think.
I feel like there aren't that many.
Listeners, hit us up if there's a slasher with a car chase. Well, I mean, Joyride to some degree.
Yeah, okay.
That definitely has a slasher vibe to it.
Okay. But still, not
you don't see it very
super
often.
common.
No, not at all.
But then we get to our next set piece, which is our incredible greenhouse. It's the greenhouse, right? Now is like he supposedly pulls off down a dirt road once again in these fucking weird country roads of France, and she follows him. / how did she know that was there? But that's, you know what? That's fine. Again.
Well, I do love this moment with the car chase where she has this gun in her car, and all of a sudden he is somehow behind her. Again, this is where I think the delusion is starting to break for her in a way, because like there are things that is a little bit fantastical, like the fact that she could lose this truck and then all of a sudden he's behind her on a single dirt road.
No, he turns off and she misses it. He turns off.
Oh, does
and she misses it, so then she reverses and turns back after him because she didn't know he was turning.
Okay. I missed that.
But still.
Part. Okay.
Yeah.
But then she has the gun and he somehow knows that she's holding the gun, because then all of a sudden he's dropping the bullets out of his truck. And I just keep thinking, can you imagine what the whiplash this would be with, like, if you were Alex again in the truck or the backseat of the car, technically, and you see her holding this gun and then she just sort of drops the bullets out. Like, what is happening? I would be mad with like
like, can you just kill me, please?
I'd just be
like I can't.
I have ceased to be.
I know.
I am disassociating myself.
I'm just gonna lay here. Like, you can just kill me. It's fine. Like, just take me. There are just some points in movies like this where I'm like, I don't know if I want to deal with the healing that happens after you survive.
I know. Like she's gonna be traumatized for the rest of her life.
Like, it's just, how do you even come back?
How would you process this situation?
You're like, cool, so my best friend was actually in love with me and killed my whole family, and I watched it happen. So, like, where do I go from here besides moving and changing your name? Like, and just, like, never talking about your past. And we all know that always goes well when you try to run from your past.
So well. So well. In cinema and in life. So well.
Oh my god. Yeah, God. I know. This movie is like trust issues 101. I swear to God. But then, you know, we are driving into the middle of the goddamn, like, they are driving into the woods for a long time. And this is the point where he ends up behind her. When they're driving on the back road, he ends up somehow magically behind her. Like, maybe he pulled off when she was falling, and then he pulls up behind her and is, like, dropping the bullets out. And it's just like, haha, got you, bitch. And it's like, how did you know? And then he starts ramming her. Wait, hold on. I pulled this up just to make sure. I think that in the back of this yellow car she's driving, there's a Confederate flag on the back of the car. I'm like 90% sure there is a Confederate flag on the back of the yellow car that she is driving.
Again,
oh no, it's gone. What's happening? Never mind. Ignore me. It looked like it was there for a hot second when he's like ramming into the back of it. I was like, why is there a Confederate flag on the back of this car? I don't understand. Anyway.
But then her car goes careening over a cliff, ends up on the top, like ends up like over, tipped over on the top of the car. She climbs out, hurt, hobbling, bleeding, makes a makeshift triage moment for her arm, grabs a stake out of the ground and starts twisting it to get barbed wire.
Oh, that's right. It's not a baseball bat.
Yes.
All right, really
Such
quick.
A cool moment.
Look at what I sent you in the chat, and look at the picture, and tell me, is that a Confederate flag on the back of the truck, on the back of the car?
Yeah.
Is it?
No, that certainly is.
I googled. I was like, am I insane?
I'm fairly certain that is a Confederate flag.
Fairly certain that is a Confederate flag on the back of a car in rural France.
Yeah, no, that is definitely
is it like a Dukes of Hazzard reference? Like,
well, see, I'm thinking like this definitely gives me Dukes of Hazzard. Like that is a red car or an orange car, vice a yellow one, but it's very similar.
That's what I was thinking too, because I know the Confederate flag has always had that connotation, but especially like in early 2000s, it's probably a way different connotation than we think about it now. But still, really weird to see that very American symbol in a French film like this.
Well, and I will also say I do think that Aja is kind of, I think there's a, as we'll see in his career as he continues onward, I think he has a love of like American cinema, particularly that era.
Yeah.
Because then he will, of course, go on to do a remake of The Hills Have Eyes, which again has similar 1970s grindhouse vibes of this film. I feel like this is the most American French film in a way.
I agree. I think this very much is very American New French. Again, this is the most accessible New French Extremity film, I think. I think a lot of the other ones are dealing like with much more kind of weird themes, and I think are a lot more like disturbing. Like this one is disturbing, but like it's still very much working in that slasher, like in like the slasher stuff. And again, like it's Aja showing how to make a French version of an American subgenre. And I love that. But a lot of the other ones are so kind of distinctly their own thing that this definitely is like, yeah, I agree with that. I also just love in horror movies when people are injured and they put the dirtiest, nastiest piece of cloth.
I know.
And like when I watched Eden Lake, I thought this when like she got into a really nasty trash can with like covered in wounds, and I'm like, guys, I know that infection is least of your worries, but all I can think of when you put those nasty like stained rags on your injuries is like you're going to go septic, you're going to get so many infections in your body. I know that's not your concern right now, but the antibiotics that you need to be pumping through your veins so soon, the putrid wounds.
So we get this. Oh, sorry.
Just
it's gross.
Infection everywhere. Anyway.
But we do get this kind of final confrontation between her two halves at this point, where we have her with her makeshift barbed wire mace, him stalking her, violence, him like sticking the switchblade against her flesh, moving up her body, asking her, why does she care so much about Alex? Does she turn you on as he is sticking his fingers in her mouth very sexually, while the knife is to her throat, again conflating sex and violence and being a confusing mix in Marie's head. And so we get this sort of like moment where she is trying to be the final girl, but then she's also grappling with the villain side of her.
And like her desire, like what does she want?
Her desire,
like
yeah.
It's almost like asking herself, like, what is your end goal here? Like where are you going with Alex? Like what's the point? Where are you going with this? And we have this epic showdown where like, you know, she beats his face in. And you're like, it's this like, she won. And did she like beat off? Ha ha ha. I'm so sorry. Beat away the demons, as they say.
You were talking about how whenever we see him, he's so like wet and it's gross. This moment of where the tarp is over his face and she is just beating him to a pulp, and then she lifts the tarp and it sticks to his skin. It's such a gross little moment.
It's so disgusting. It is good, but
it's so like, every time I see it, I'm like, that's right, because it just sort of like feels like it's stuck to his flesh because of all the blood and the violence.
A pulpy face. Orange juice with extra pulp.
Which is the only way to drink orange juice for me.
Are you serious?
Give me all that pulp. I am. I love all the pulp. Give me all that pulp.
The worst... Okay, can I tell you the worst thing? And I don't want to ruin it for you. I don't want to ruin pulp for you.
No, do. Please do.
My aunt, Sarah, who is basically like my sister, said to me, drinking pulp is like drinking the little lip when your lips are dry and you peel off the lip, like the dry skin off your lips. Pulp is like the dry skin you peel off of your lips.
Okay.
And so whenever I have pulp...
That didn't ruin it for me.
Thank God, because it ruined orange juice with pulp for me. I can't drink it with pulp now. Like, if there's pulp in it, I won't be upset. But, like, whenever all I can fucking think about is that disgusting thing my aunt said. Bitch.
I know that I'm weird, but I love pulpy orange juice.
Respect, but yeah, lips, lip skin in my OJ. But I going back to the movie, when you talked about like the razor blade and how he's going up her body, but it's interesting because when she kind of has the switch, she has her hands down her pants, and at this point he puts the razor down her pants, and there is this incredible, once again, like you said, this like sexual element here of like when her mind kind of splits versus like when it comes back to get like when it seems to be coming back together again. Scare quotes. This is again cinematic language we're using here. We've said it a million times, but I just want to continue to like tell people, right? This is not, but it's like the parallels in these moments like really solidify what is going on here for me as a viewer, and of course head trauma makes a lot of sense, not just in terms of easy to kill, but like the place where everything is going on for Marie is in her head. So it feels like something destroying that center might somehow help, maybe.
Yeah, and it's a good like bookend to the way she is initially introduced with the killer, where she is hiding in darkness and she is unable to do anything as she is watching the killing come out. Now the flashlight is illuminating her. She's in the light. She is fighting back. She is finally unable to be paralyzed by whatever is going on in her head, and she fights back for this brief moment.
And it's like, you want to be like, yeah, bitch, like, you did it. You beat the shit out of him with your barbed wire. And I do love that because I feel like so often in horror movies, they don't check to make sure. They just beat the shit out of him and, this fucking flesh sticking to the tarp. But she checks. He's like, is he dead for real, for real? Which I feel like, again.
Yep, she even, like, is listening to see if he's breathing.
Yeah. And, like, I love... So, Cécile de France, who plays Marie... I love her performance in this movie. Incredibly unhinged.
She's fantastic.
But, like, when she's checking on him, her eyes are, like, wide, and she's, like, panicking. And, like, she just... Everything about her is just feral, and I love that. Like, she is such, like, incredible. And I saw her in this, and then I saw another, like, very wholesome French movie. Like, the ones Alex West talks about in her book of, like, oh, yes, these, like, wholesome, like, twee French movies. And I saw her in one of those, and all I could think of was, like, I have seen you commit so much murder on screen. Like, you are not, like, this cute French, to me, like, you are not this cute French woman. You are a fucking chaotic, feral creature. So it's always very funny seeing that. Because I think she is known for being, like, she's, like, a relatively well-known French actor. So seeing her as this, like, unhinged, feral... Well, then we see her do this, like, scream when she beats the shit out of him. He's still alive. She suffocates him with the plastic. And she lets out this, like, scream. And we love the final girl scream of, like, relief. We sure do. And, like... But again, like, mirroring an orgasm. Like, the scream orgasm connection we always think about in terms of, like, a... kind of visceral expression of emotion. So we again, the parallel of her orgasming and him appearing, her screaming and having that kind of appearance of orgasm, and he is supposedly going away. So again, interesting kind of parallels here with sexuality, and particularly Maria's sexuality.
Yep, and then we get the truth, because we have a video playback as the cops finally arrive at the gas station, and we see physical evidence that it is not this crazy man killer that is going on a rampage. It is actually Marie. She is the one with the axe. She stands over the gas attendant's body and then looks up at the camera. It's almost as if she is disassociating at this point. Again, using cinema language. I gotta be clear that we're talking about cinema and movie and not reality. And then she climbs into the back of the truck with Alex, and she is telling her he's dead. And she's saying, you don't make any sense. It's over, Alex. I killed him. Get away from me. And it's like finally, this moment of, like, realizing how traumatized poor Alex would have to be in this situation.
And, like, and then poor Alex and what I love is, like, how, again, like, smiley Marie is here when she's like, Alex, I did it. I'm so like
manic.
Like very, again, like the manic wide eyes smile. Like, I did it. I saved you. And now that I have saved you, you should love me. And Alex is like, you are crazy. You killed my family. Goodbye. And then we get our last like confrontation where Alex is finally able to kind of, she has been chained in the back of this car the whole time, has been like, yelled at, and has had really no agency, is finally given this like very powerful moment of agency that makes her our final girl. Again, we've had this whole idea of this whole time. Oh God, she's going to be killed. She's just another like, she's like a slutty character, etc., whatever. Like, but then,
I mean, even early on in the movie, Marie calls her a slut.
Yeah.
Early on in the movie.
Like for having any kind of
like
sexual
attraction.
Yeah, like they're joking about like, you're a man eater, like you want to have sex with so many dudes, and it's like.
And here's where I will say that the kind of the idea of what we've been seeing up to this point being stuck in Marie's head, and now the reality is coming crashing down, because this is the first time that we're seeing things not from her perspective. We're seeing the cops at the gas station giving us the bit of knowledge that Marie is the killer, and then we see this mix between Marie running after Alex, but also the killer running after Alex. And the language that is being used between the both of them is so different. When it's her, she's saying, I'm going to take care of you, Alex. Like, I'm here to save you. And then we cut between sometimes seeing her running with this circular chainsaw, which again, Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibes of like the way it's shot. But then we also see the male presence with like the saw, and what he's saying is, you'll pay for this, you little bitch. So the language that is being utilized between the two of them is like so night and day. There's like I'll take care of you, I'm gonna kill you, you little bitch. Like just that dichotomy there.
Well, and it's like, so again, so gendered, like in terms of what is going on here. But we also get Alex stabs Marie. Like, Alex does get, like, cuts in. But then, all of a sudden, we cut to seeing Marie as the killer pulling the knife. So this is where we really see this, like, conflation. And in my head, I love how, she has a concrete saw. It's a concrete saw. She just has that, like, in her car. Like,
I know.
And all I can imagine, to me, in watching this was actually Marie saying both things at the same time to be even more confused, like even more terrifying. Like it's Cecile de France saying both of those things in a way. Like obviously visually we see it differently, but because it's interesting here because obviously the perspective has kind of switched, but not really. Like we are still kind of seeing the story from her.
Yeah, we're seeing both. I think we're seeing what is really happening, and we're seeing what she's seeing in her head is this like. This mishmash is unable to continue. This delusion is unable to continue anymore. So the viewer are seeing the madness play out on screen as being what is really happening and what is inside Marie's head that we've been following this entire movie.
Well, and then we see what happened at the beginning of the film, but instead of it being Marie getting into the car and like getting the guy to pull over, it's Alex, and Alex is running from Marie. So we're kind of seeing everything come full circle, seeing how like fantasy versus reality, again, like everything kind of coming to a head and making a little bit of like, a lot more sense in terms of what has been fantastical and what has actually been happening. And then we get our lovely, iconic final big massive kill gore moment with her running up a car and attacking a guy with a concrete saw.
The windshield. And just spraying.
Just absolutely
poor Alex.
Spraying Alex with blood. Like
to the point where she actually, there's a moment where she spits out blood in her mouth. Like it is like, it's again, these little details of the gore, whether it's the tarp sticking to the skin or whether she's been covered in so much blood that she's forcing it out of her mouth is so, it's gross, but so gnarly.
And we get another final girl scream here because she's like I love that she like holds her ears. She's like, I can't even, like, comprehend. Like, I don't even know what to do. Like, all I can
It's Marilyn Burns.
Yeah, exactly.
It's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yeah. I have nothing I can do except just scream because I am broken at this point.
And I love how, you see this with her mom in, like, her white pajamas, but also, Alex is wearing, like, light-colored pajamas, but then they're soaked with blood. And I just, it's such a small thing that I love in horror when, like, clothes just get absolutely soaked and they completely like turn different colors. It's just, something about that detail is always just like very fascinating and fun to me, just to add a little bit of pun intended color to everything. But wow. And of course, then we get the final crowbar stabbing, I guess, of Marie, and then we get our final kind of like seeing her in the hospital / police station.
I'm going to say it is either a police station or it is a mental hospital with a two-way mirror, because I don't think that is in regular hospitals.
Yeah, agree.
But it's a recreation of that first scene, but we actually see the truth now. Yeah. Where she is handcuffed. It is not that she is sitting there as like a survivor of this. She is handcuffed because she is the main suspect of this. She is dangerous. And it's an interesting inversion of this sort of like Ouroboros of like cinema, where you're starting from that beginning scene, we're coming up to it, but then we're realizing that beginning scene is again not telling us the entire story.
Yep. And I love the final shot where it's like her seeing Alex there and reaching out to her with her shackles. Like she still has no idea what she did. And she's like, I told you I'd protect you. Like, why don't you want to love me? And I mean, even one of the last things she says to Alex when she's coming at her with the fucking saw is, do you love me? You don't love me, do you? Like, again, solidifying this like very problematic, like killer lesbian trope of, you know, if their desire is unrequited, if they are closeted, the repressed emotions will manifest in this like horrific killing spree where heterosexual families are destroyed and the heterosexual woman must be punished, but then again, the queer person is ultimately defeated and they are blocked away because they are problematic queer. So, again, love this movie. 100% problematic in representations of queerness and mental illness, but still incredibly clever.
So I'm curious, who did you decide back then was the final girl
Alex.
With that?
Alex, 100%.
Alex?
Yeah, I wrote a lot about how, you know, again, a lot of when I said Aja is playing with our expectations of what, like, the traditional definition is of the final girl. He flips it on its head because we do actually, like, the person who actually witnesses all this death and who actually is surviving until the very end and who is, like, forced to kind of confront the demons is Alex. So, Alex is our final girl. 110%. Ugh. High tension.
And, you know, the thing is that, like, I think this is one of those classic examples of a movie that when we're watching it, we might love it. I love this movie. I still love this movie. I think it is paced incredibly well. I think it's like one of those things that by the time you're at the end, you're like realizing, oh shit, this movie's almost over with. And you don't even think that it is the rather slight. I think it's like, is it even 30 minutes?
It's 90 minutes. It's like 90 minutes exactly.
Yeah. 90 minutes exactly. But it doesn't feel, it feels much shorter. Mm-hmm. Like it just, once the violence starts, it just is taking off on a high tension exploration of horror. I love that. But it's one of those things where you have to, like, you know, analyze, we love this movie, but there are a lot of issues of it that are problematic. They were problematic back in 2003. They're more problematic now in 2023. But it's still an incredibly well-made, intense, terrifying movie.
So, again, a case of appreciating it, but being able to very much point out the problems with it. But I think it's like, you know, an incredibly important film in the new French Extremity. I think it's like it's the movie I think that popularized the movement and got more people. Like you said, it had that release in the States, and I think it brought more awareness to what was going on internationally, particularly in France / Belgium, and opened up a lot of people's minds to what horror can look like. That was our Fresh Wounds episode on High Tension. And the beginning of New French Extremity, all combined into one beautiful 2-hour-long package for our Patreon subscribers.
There you go.
We haven't picked the next movie yet, y'all, but we'll let you know what our next New French Extremity film is. If you have any suggestions for ones we should cover, you want to hear us talk about, comment below on this post on Patreon. We've talked about Martyrs with Eric LaRocca, so we're not going to talk about that one because we already have that.
I don't want to watch it again.
So go listen to that episode. Eric and I love Martyrs. Terry does not. It was a really good conversation, so go listen to that episode. So we're not going to cover Martyrs only because we talked about it before. Very in depth. Let us know what you think we should watch next. Would love to hear what you think. So on that note, listeners, you've heard from us. We want to hear from you. Again, comment down below your thoughts about High Tension, New French Extremity, all that good stuff. You can also email us at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com. You hopefully follow us on Twitter, but if you don't, I'm at MB McAndrews.
I'm at Gailey Dreadful.
And once again, if you're a patron, you should be following at Scarred Podcast on Twitter, but if you're not, go do that.
And thank you so much for supporting us. It really means the world to us. We have a small but mighty little number of patrons, and we're very thankful for you. So thanks again for all of that amazing support. And if you haven't for some reason, please make sure that you have reviewed, rated, and subscribed to us on various, whatever your podcast host of choice is, because it does help us get to new people. So
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to Eric Power for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our music. Thank you, everyone, for supporting and listening. Please stay safe out there. But most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.